You mentioned the tents. The design is actually very interesting. Who
Very,
came up with the
very
design?
interesting is open-ended, Jeff. Is that a compliment or a non-pliment?
I think looking at it, thinking deeply,
Yeah,
it fits perfectly
yeah,
with what you're trying to achieve.
yeah.
And I'm just sort of wondering, was it always like that? Or was it more the end iteration to get there?
Well, a very good question, actually. So I think the challenge of how our planning laws work and how architecture and how that whole process works is that you need to have definitive decisions made really early on, right?
Yeah,
Without actually knowing too much about it. And I was like, well, as you'd know, in the tech space, we have the concept of the MVP from the lean startup, right? Which is all about iterations and how do you
exactly.
adjust and how do you build upon, from the feedback that you get. So there was an idea of just, wouldn't it be amazing if you were in an open field away from everyone else, you felt safe on this decking, so you'd know what you're stepping on, and just being able to like sleep in comfort. So that was the genesis of like where it all started from. And then the iterations that took on from that were from guest learnings and from just experimenting with things. So luckily by having, 3 tents, we were able to experiment with various other features, and just sometimes deducting things and sometimes adding things, and getting a bit of an idea of where it's at, but all inspired by the tech world, right? And so now with the next phase that we're going into, and building additional tents, which is like incredibly exciting, and it feels like it's been a long time in the making. It's going to be yet another significant iteration, implementing a whole lot of those learnings that now might be a little bit more difficult to put in this current concept. So kind of like wiping the slate clean and going, okay, what can we do now to take this experience to the next level?
Can you share? I'm happy, feel free to keep it under wraps, but you've really got me excited. I'm curious. What do you...
I could talk about it, but it's more about seeing it. And so, yeah, without like, wanting to seem evasive, it's not about that. It really is about like, just how do you communicate this to do it justice? But it is really about creating, more, bringing the element of, say, for example, the real camping spirit, right?
Got it.
So I think, and this is just my observation, the challenge with glamping, even though we're in astrotourism, but the challenge of glamping is that it's such an undefined industry, and interpretations are so varied. So it hasn't found term yet. You know how you go to a motel and you go like, well,
it's very defined.
You're going to have your Bible in the bedside table. You're going to have a TV. You're going to have a very loud, minibar fridge and all of these things, and the dry Arnott's biscuits. So it's like you pretty much know exactly what I'm talking about, because it describes pretty much every single motel that goes between $60 to about $190, $200, pretty much anywhere in Australia. So it's hard to kind of like mess around with that, and then guest expectations are there. So whereas with now, the industry is not called so much glamping anymore, it's unique stays. And so there is so much interpretation that is coming into it, which is the exciting part, but also can be somewhere where you could fall short depending on, what the expectations of the guests are and how good you are with communicating what it's all about. So I think, moving where our interpretation of this experience is the spirit of camping with luxuries, right? So what we really want to hone in on a whole lot more is like, well, how do you cook? in a camping setting where you've got amazing skillets, you've got various other elements that you can employ to really create takeaway experiences for guests, something that they can remember doing. Imagine making nachos pretty much like from scratch in a camp setting. You'd remember that, right? And as we've learned, the the spectrum of people's experiences are so broad that it defies belief. We literally had a journalist once that came from overseas, and we were showing her around, and she was 28 years old at that point, and she points to a fire pit and goes, "What's that?" And we're like, "Oh, it's a fire pit." She goes, "What do you do with that?" We're like, "Well, we light a fire in there."
Yeah.
And she's like, "You light a fire?" So we like lit a fire for her. It was actually the first time that she saw a live fire.
Wow.
And so for us, like we go, that is something that is unheard of, but that is the reality of so many people and actually so many of our guests. So creating an experience where you can create a safe experience, but you can onboard them and allow them to, have this input and create things for themselves, and going all the way to, people that have been camping since before I was born, and how do you not, patronize them with instructions and with going, this is how you do it, but allow them to get what they want out of the experience. It presents its own challenges, and like, how do you make sure everything is done safely as well, where things don't get out of hand?
So in a sense, Sonny, you're trying to be innovative. You want to enhance the camping sort of spirit into your accommodation, but at the same time, you need to meet the expectations of your customers, but also pay homage to what the fundamental concept is. And you need to find how it all sort of balances in a way.
Well, yeah, because I think you can
Is that
push
right?
it. Well, it is. I mean, there is. I don't think there is any more succinct way to define it than what you have mentioned. So it is about like, how do you go down a slightly different pathway that's still not alien to people, but it is taking them down a different direction. That is something that's a bit different. And I think like, what we have here, I mean, we're in Australia, we're blessed with having so much space, right? In so many countries you aren't. And so you understand why, when people buy a 10-acre block in the UK, they kind of have to fulfill that resort style model, which is a very known structure in the accommodation industry. And so they just replicate that, right? Even with the glamping setup. But what we really wanted to do, when purely, well, partly through naivety, was we just wanted to feel like we're the only people in the mountains. So by having this space and having so much land around us and access to, you're able to create a very different experience by having structures set so far apart. And so you don't actually need to go and, go around a communal fire. It's about you and your partner. And it creates a whole different array of possibilities with what you can do with that. So it is furthering down on that. And, it is something that really resonates with our guests, and something that they really appreciate, that it's not, having 12 bubble tents right next to each other and you can hear somebody snore next door. Like, you can literally play your music as loudly as you like and no one will hear you. So it's like, what does that do, when you're out in the country and you can be that in tune with Mother Nature and that like free in loosening your inhibitions.
Wow, that's beautiful. And so your approach going forward, are you looking to even push the envelope a bit more? I know you talked a lot about, expectations, not taking people along a journey which is too outside of the comfort zone, because therefore the gap of the experience is too much. Have you thought about creating a concept or a sort of a functional design change which would really be out there? Or are you still leaning towards that lean startup sort of thing where you're very much utilizing the feedback loop?
Yeah.
And then implementing?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And there is no definitive process that I can tell you that I'm doing. Sometimes I feel like I'm reverting in certain ideas, and sometimes I feel like certain ideas are being extended upon. So, yeah, there is, it's kind of a mishmash of a whole lot of different processes that we're undergoing. So even, for example, like sun shields that we have for our tents, right? I think we're on our 7th iteration in terms of trying out different fabrics, different straps, something that's going to be not too heavy, but not too light, so it's fragile, and so it's going to serve its purpose, right? And then I've got about 30 of those experiments happening at the same time, with like day beds, with like kitchens, with like all of these different things, you know. So there's a whole lot of different, I guess, experiments or learnings that are happening at the
Permutations and
same time.
combinations that you can do.
100%, 100%. So I think it does, you know, sometimes you feel a little bit lazy. You're like, I've got 3 structures, but I feel so overworked and like, you know, my head's everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that's really what it takes to create something that's really going to resonate, you know. And the 2 pieces of feedback that we get most that we get most frequently from guests is that pictures don't do it justice, and that we've thought of everything. So it's a really great place to be at, but there is also so much more work to be done, and so many more possibilities of you know, taking something that's already very good to something that's even better. So I think that journey and that you know, I feel like I'm able to play, you know. It's about, I've been thinking about it a fair bit, you know, like I come from a production background and a storytelling background, and that's really something
It's very
that's
pathetic.
but it's very, like, we are creating stories here as
Yeah,
well.
you are.
And so, like, you know, when people come and propose to their partner here, like, and we have at least 1 proposal a week, as far as I'm aware, you know, that is disclosed, and so far we have 100% strike rate, because no one's been pushed off the cliff yet. So it's like the greatest compliment you can get, you know, that you play a small part in somebody's eternal memories. So it's amazing, you know. We don't take that for granted. Like, it's just it really hits you in the feels every time it happens. So being able to create experiences around that, and, you know, to extend upon it, even, like, it's joy, you know, like, and it's really something that just energizes you.
I can feel the joy from your voice.